This program is brought to you by Allianz, your global partner for comprehensive insurance and asset management solutions.
Welcome to a new edition of Inside Grand Prix. Today you can find out everything about the Canadian Grand Prix. First, let's cross over the big pond to a country rich in nature and tradition. Gold on the Klondike River, the sensational news of 1896. Armed with picks and pans, thousands of fortune hunters followed the call to Canada's wild north. Only a very few became rich, and many paid for their courage with their lives. It was a hard and wild time time again wars ravaged the sought-after land. What remains is above all the legend of freedom and adventure. Welcome to Canada in 2006. The time of the gold rush is long over. Today the image seems modern and cosmopolitan. Even so, the influences of the many immigrants bear witness to the great adventure of the old days. They brought their cultures to the new world, especially from Europe and Asia. Under French control for many generations, the metropolis of Montreal, with 3.6 million inhabitants. Its own very particular living culture quickly casts its spell on visitors. And even for the old hands in the motor racing circus, it always offers something very special. Canada's like Australia, in a park in the city, so there's an absolutely brilliant atmosphere. The Canadians are very open and the party atmosphere takes over the whole city, so the spectators have both the Grand Prix and the city. It's real high life and I love it. Not that I get to go out being a racing driver, but it's all part of the whole scene. The special charm of Montreal is also reflected in its festival culture. Theatre, performing arts, music. Hardly a month goes by without events like the world-famous Jazz Festival. Shows like the Cirque du Soleil started out here. The Montreal people love art and have swing in their blood. A total contrast to the cities, an immense territory of untouched nature. On average, just 3.2 inhabitants share each square kilometre of land in Canada. Your outdoor fans can find their El Dorado of unlimited possibilities. Whether it's water sports or winter sports, here everything's just a little bit bigger. A legend, the Alaska Highway. Relics of an earlier age prove its significance as a traffic artery. The wide expanses and the solitude attract adventurers from all over the world. Gigantic national parks offer a welcome opportunity to relax.
Yeah, there's a ski resort not far from the city. Of course, it's the summer, but I go there anyway and riding my mountain bike, and you can do some stuff with the chairlift and things and have some fun up there. So you have to be careful of the black bears because they're not so friendly, but it's a good part of the world.
Canada, a country with many faces and people from many nations. They define the Canadian way, and excitement is part of their philosophy of life. So the setting is perfect, and ever since the old days on the Klondike River, horsepower has always been crucial. Coming up in Safety Focus, perfect preparation, logistics. But first, a quick lap in Montreal. The circuit in Montreal is located on a man-made island in the middle of the St. Lawrence River. It's named after racing legend Gilles Villeneuve. Its charm, flat-out racing 60% of the time, and 7 tight corners.
The setup in Canada is very important. You need to get the wing level right so you can get the top speeds correct, so then your braking performance is very, very good as well for the tight corners. So as always, it's a compromise, and in Canada it's probably a bit harder to get to that compromise to get the ultimate lap time out of the car, and also then the consistency to look after the tyres and the brakes to have a different downforce level.
It gets tricky immediately after the start. In the group through the tight center corners. Into the gap, out of the mass of jostling cars, the battle for positions has begun. The following corners are also demanding. Forces of 2.3 G press the drivers into their cockpits. After an almost 90-degree left-hander, the drivers reach the Pont de la Concorde. Up into top gear, they need flat wings and little downforce. The cars break the 300-kilometer barrier 4 times on this circuit, but that means they have to brake all the harder in Montreal.
And in Montreal you have the largest intake system for the front and rear brake ducts because you need to get as much cooling air as possible to the discs. Sometimes you can even have problems with glazing in practice because you have so much cooling air there, but when it comes to the race you need to have all of this cooling to avoid oxidization on the disc, which causes high wear.
An example, the épingle hairpin. From 300 right down to 65 kilometers an hour in just 150 meters. And that's not even the hardest braking point. Next, a straight almost 1,000 meters long. At top speed, the drivers race towards the notorious Wall of Champions. In 1999, 3 World Cup champions crashed straight into this wall. Michael Schumacher, Jacques Villeneuve and Damon Hill. The wall at the exit from the corner, I think most of the world champions have crashed here at some point. I hit it once too during time practice. It's very tricky because you arrive there and have to bump over these curbs on the right and left very aggressively. And they're not particularly small either. Sometimes they can throw you offline, and if you land badly, suddenly boom, you're in the wall or you spin. 70 times the drivers can get it right or wrong here at the entrance to the start-finish straight at the Canadian Grand Prix. Now for a look at the current championship standings. In the drivers' standings, Raikkonen moves 1 point closer to Fisichella. And in the Constructors' Championship, everything remains unchanged. The blue and yellows keep pushing on ahead with great reliability. Next in Legends, Formula 1 30 years ago. But now a portrait of the Canadian driver. People always say he's a loner, does his own thing, is difficult, an intellectual among the racing drivers, someone who reads books as well as telemetry data, someone who doesn't keep his mouth closed, but always takes the liberty to say what he thinks.
Freedom means the possibility to think whatever you want, and then to just make decisions, to be able to take decisions, and even when you have obligations, you still have freedom. You still have a choice in how to react, and that's very important.
His famous name went before him, even before his first Formula One race in Melbourne in 1996. Jacques Villeneuve, the son of the charismatic Ferrari driver Gilles Villeneuve, who was killed in an accident at the Belgian Grand Prix in Zolder in 1982. From his father, he learnt all that he would need to know years later as a Formula One driver.
To push the limit, and to only expect the best of yourself, to expect to be better than everybody else. So if you're not, you just have to work harder at it until you will be better than the rest, and to live on the edge and to not let anything have an effect on you. To be an iceberg when you need to be.
Jacques followed in his father's footsteps even as a young lad. Speed is the drug, and the goal is the elixir.
D'arriver champion du monde.
He achieved his goal in 1997. At the age of 26, he's so far one of the youngest ever Formula One world champions.
You live the past, and the past is what makes you who you are today. But I don't like dwelling on the past. The past exists, and you don't need anything or anyone reminding you what it is. You just remember the good memories anyway.
What followed was not the Villeneuve era, but rather his sporting decline. After he moved from Williams to BAR in 1999, he was no longer competitive and was even regarded as a rip-off.
There's been a few years where it was totally wrong. 2001 to 2003, mostly 2002 and 2003. It was, for some reason, some image had been pushed out that was totally wrong, and that's lingering a little bit now. It's still part of my baggage, sadly. But slowly, the true colors are coming out again, and people are starting to respect it.
In 2000, he even lost his seat after a poor pre-season. He has not managed to repeat his earlier successes either on his comeback at Renault or at Sauber. And his seat at BMW this season will probably not change that either. Everything's gone very quiet around the charismatic world champion of '97. Perhaps the driver with the famous name is gradually saying goodbye to Formula One. Coming up in Safety Focus, everything about logistics. And now in Techno, everything in hand, the steering wheel. An extreme workplace, the racetrack, the command and nerve center, the cockpit, and the most important tool, the steering wheel. Keeping the highly tuned racing weight of over 600 kilograms on the ideal line is one thing. The other, operating the buttons, switches and rocker switches correctly at the right moment during the race. Each of these impressive multifunctional all-rounders costs about 25,000 euros. They're extremely complex and demand a high concentration capacity from the drivers. The steering wheel. Most important part is the clutch back here. Right, you shift up, left, and you shift down. 2 clutch pedals. Seen from the front, which is quite important for us drivers, we have here the speed, the gear that's currently engaged, temperature display, the water temperature, the oil temperature, and the functions that we can adjust on the track. Traction control, engine braking, and the differential. Pit limit is very, very important. You activate it to avoid being too quick in the pit lane. 100 kilometers an hour is allowed during the race. Finally, the other really important thing is the radio. We can talk to the engineers who give us details about how the race is going and which position we're in. Wooden steering wheels, nowadays an elegant accessory, but back then absolutely standard. The heroes of the track of many years ago used to keep their racing monsters under control with a thin wheel like this. Strong steering forces tore mercilessly at their arms. For the years, the cars became lighter and the cockpits narrower, so the steering wheels also became smaller and handier. But still, there was no sign of any high tech. Today, the engineers and the drivers tinker together to produce the best specific solution for their own needs. A precise fit, ideal freedom of movement. Each team finds their very own individual solution to the issues. And also, at the end of the day, exactly how the adjustment possibilities are assigned to the steering wheel. The ease of operation can often account for extra seconds.
In cockpit,
of course, you can do a very great deal in the cockpit, especially with the steering wheel. There are thousands of options: traction control, the differential or engine braking and so on. You can adjust them in all directions. It can really help your cars, especially when it's starting to wear. You can close down the differential a bit, which means you have more understeering. That helps the rear axle. Or you can close down the traction control a bit more, which means that the engine gives you less power when accelerating, and that also helps the rear tires. Of course, you can also lose a bit of time then, but spread over the whole distance, it does help you. As so often in Formula One, carbon and aluminium play a decisive role in the steering wheel. All in all, a weight of over 1.3 kilograms lies in the hands of the driver. Driving skill and dexterity. The better this blend works, the closer the team's result will be to a possible victory. Time for a short break, but we'll be right back with all the key facts on the Canadian Grand Prix. In Safety Focus, we'll show you all the work the teams do ready for every Grand Prix. Don't go away.
Allianz, Insurance and Asset Management. Allianz, Insurance and Asset Management.
Welcome back to Inside Grand Prix. Coming up, news and facts. But first, in Safety Focus, preparation is everything. Logistics in Formula One. When the circus comes to town, every team sends an impressive fleet to the race. Equipped for top-class motor racing in the right place at the right time. The logistics have to work perfectly, especially for overseas races like the Canadian Grand Prix.
Obviously, flyaway races are very different in the fact that we have to pack everything in boxes and send it in planes. So, and everything is paid for per kilo. So the biggest problem is trying to get the weight and everything as little as possible because it's exceedingly expensive. So we are now sending a lot of equipment sea freight, which the week before we go to Imola, I have to send all of the stuff to North America that week.
32 tons of material, 120 crates and containers, 10,000 individual parts. A travel kit for a Formula One race. Once they arrive, the 65 crew members don't have a moment to lose. Setting up the pit lane, assembling everything, laying the data cables. Nothing can be left to chance on site, and there are 6 copies of almost all the car parts, even in North America.
Car spares, ratios, wings, floors, we take exactly the same as we take to Europe. That's why we take over 26 tons of air freight. So you can't compromise the car against the air freight. You know, the car has to come first. And if you can't win a race because there's something we didn't take for the sake of a few kilos, it wouldn't be good. So we don't compromise the car in any way with air freight.
The advanced guard arrives on the Monday, and the engineering staff as from the Tuesday. The drivers join the team on the Thursday. It's like at a concert. The driver is the star who has to be able to rely on his roadies and the band, so that everything can really rock on tour.
Das ganze Material muss jetzt zusammengepackt werden und wieder
All the material has to be unpacked, packed up again and flown over. It has to be a huge effort.
Und als Fahrer kriegt man dann schon eher wenig.
As a driver, you tend not to see much of it because you have your race weekend and then you have to leave again the next day. Then you have to test drive again maybe, or maybe sponsor appointments and so on, when the mechanics do their job.
Ihren Job machen. Also es sind halt 2 Jobs.
It's just 2 different jobs, and unfortunately you don't see much of each other. And in the same way, the mechanics don't see much of my PR days.
Von meinen PR-Tagen oder so mitkriegen.
Different tasks, different worlds, but still they have to work in harmony, hand in hand in the battle for the best team performance. 18 appearances, 18 times packing and unpacking, 100,000 kilometers traveled around the globe. Formula One on tour is just like living in camp, a real sense of togetherness, but with the risk of going stir crazy. Outside Europe, everyone has to pull together even closer. Total concentration in an extremely small space.
Probably Brazil is probably, in terms of how much space you have, it's a very, very limited amount of room for the teams to operate in. So of course the driver to find somewhere to maybe relax a little bit, and also for the rest of the team to try and do their work in terms of the marketing or commercial team. That's very hard for them to get the right amount of room as well. So that's a tough track. But then, because like I say, for the European races we have all our stuff which we take motorhome wise, and that's easier for us to do our job, I suppose, in a more relaxed way, and escape if we want to, and see people in a more relaxed atmosphere.
The spectators don't get to see any of all that. And when the Grand Prix is over and the grandstands are empty again, the big pack starts again in the driver's cab. The circus moves on to its next stop. And thanks to the logistics experts, the path to get there is already smooth. Now we continue with our series Formula One 30 years ago. As the Grand Prix circus arrived in Zolder in Belgium, all eyes were fixed on the Tyrrell team. There had never been a Formula One car with 4 front wheels. The team hoped to gain advantages in the corners, because more rubber on the track should guarantee higher speeds. 4th position on the starting grid for Patrick Depailler, and 7th for Jody Scheckter in his 40th Grand Prix led to high hopes for the race. After a strong performance in qualifying, it again looked like another Ferrari victory. The group of favourites included not only Patrick Depailler, but also James Hunt in the McLaren. As so often that season, he immediately moved behind Niki Lauda and tried to keep up with the apparently all-powerful Austrian. A certain feeling of familiarity spread throughout the race events after just the first lap. Lauda out in front with James Hunt lurking behind. Then the rest of the field with Jacques Lafitte and the Ligier as a welcome touch of blue and a new pretender for a place on the podium. Even 30 years ago, there was already a class society in Formula One. Ferrari out front, and McLaren and Tyrrell on equal terms. All the other teams were perfectly happy to at least claim occasional successes. As a rule, 5 of the 6 possible point-winning places were occupied by Ferrari, McLaren and Tyrrell. In the last third of the race, the Ferrari duo of Niki Lauda and Clay Regazzoni had already established a lead of almost 30 seconds. At that time, James Hunt was already battling against tricky technical problems. There seemed to be signs of gearbox damage. In the 36th of 70 laps, Hunt had to accept that there was no point in carrying on. Crossing the start-finish line, he had no choice but to park his car and return to the pit lane on foot.
Gearbox failed. You probably saw it was smoking for about 10 laps. Must have been losing the oil from the gearbox. I arrived down, I was driving glued to the oil pressure gauge, thinking it was the motor, and then I arrived down there and had a box full of neutrals.
As the checkered flag was waved, it marked the second 1-2 for Ferrari. After 5 races in the new season, the dominance of the Reds was oppressive. Ferrari led the constructors' standings with a lead of 23 points, and Niki Lauda was 24 points ahead of Regazzoni in the Drivers' Championship. At that time in the championship, the only question was how early in the season Niki Lauda would claim the world title again. Jacques Lafitte claimed the first podium place for the French team Ligier, and was just as delighted as if he'd won. Jody Scheckter added 3 more points to his account. Alan Jones won the first 2 for Surtees, and Jochen Mass claimed the final point. In Belgium, it seemed as though the championship was already wrapped up. Now for our news and facts. It could be a real celebration. Michelin could claim its 100th Formula One victory in Canada, just ahead of Bridgestone. The chances are good.
I think we are okay. The Michelin tire performed very well in the winter there, so I'm really confident the Michelin tire will be better than Bridgestone in this race, and hopefully we can have the win and battle Ferrari.
The current standings 97 to 99, advantage France. Now let's see which tyres will be faster. Ferrari and Bridgestone need to catch up and want to win again at last in Canada. Montreal is one of the classic high-speed tracks, which is good for the Reds. At Silverstone they drove about 2 to 4 kilometers faster than the rest of the field on the straights. Not even the reliable Renaults could keep up. So advantage Italy. Let's see if top speed's decisive for the victory. What exactly do tractors and Formula One cars have in common? The answer is Ferrari. One of the biggest players in the agricultural industry is linking up with the Scuderia. A liaison's planned between the sponsor and the racing team, initially for the next 2 races. The partners will then decide if the earnings are satisfactory, whether to go on ploughing the same field in the future. And now for our brake facts. The engineers from Brembo predict that the drivers will face their toughest challenge just before the start-finish line. This is the fastest portion of the track. They'll have to brake from a top speed of 340 kilometers an hour down to 120, and all in just 2.5 seconds. The drivers are subjected to centrifugal forces of 4G. That was Inside Grand Prix. We'll be back for the next Grand Prix in the USA.
This program was brought to you by Allianz, your global partner for comprehensive insurance and asset management solutions. This program is brought to you by Allianz, your global partner for comprehensive insurance and asset management solutions.
Coming your way in the next edition of Inside Grand Prix, Making Amends, Formula One in the USA. In safety focus, not too hard, not too soft, in the search for the perfect tire. Our experts explain to you everything you need to know about the race in Indianapolis, so don't miss the next edition of Inside Grand Prix.
This program is brought to you by Allianz, your global partner for comprehensive insurance and asset management solutions.